Glad you took the opportunity to join us in this webinar today. We host them monthly, as well as monthly and weekly workshops. We have a podcast as well, and we do a monthly happy hour now. So check out our website on the upcoming events page to see what we have coming up for you. Joining me in this communications conversation we're going to have today, we have educator and activist and the founder of Learn, Grow, Expand, Sam Barrow.
Hey, Lorelei, thank you so much for having me back.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Sam. We are really excited for you to share with us better ways for us to grow our professional communication style, including more inclusive language.
Awesome. So let's get started.
Excellent.
So welcome, everyone. This is Let's Change the Conversation, a strategic guide to communication. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I am currently a training analyst at a company called HERdacity. Before that, I was a director of operations at a couple of different startups. And I've been doing this adult education for about 10 or 15 years now. I also am a toy collector. If you are into Funkos or Bear Bricks or Unicornos, if you don't know what those are, please check them out. And then I am a cat mom. So if you see a cat on this call, her name is Atari. We're hoping she stays asleep. But we're going to go ahead and get started with this webinar right now, and I'm going to go over what we expect to get from this. So the outcomes here are identifying your preferred communication style, learning how to utilize intentional and inclusive language in your everyday, and then learning how to deliver and receive feedback. For the first minute, we're going to do a quick exercise, and it's called Find Your Superpower. You're going to take the next minute to write down at least 10 things that you're good at. It can be personal, professional, silly, serious, whatever you want. You don't have to share it with anybody, but you do want to do this exercise because we'll be building on it later. And when you're done writing down those 10 things, you're going to circle the ones that you're especially proud of and put a line through anything you aren't passionate about. After that, we'll do a quick survey, but I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to get started. Again, you're writing down 10 things that you're good at. Don't think too hard on it. Just like, what are you good at? Start. I also forgot to mention, if you have questions, feel free to unmute or put them in the chat. Happy to answer them if you need any clarification or anything that you want to highlight. All right, you got about 20 more seconds. All right, you're going to finish up your sentences now. Again, 10 things, as many as you can write down. And then if you haven't gotten to the second parts, which is circling the ones that you're really proud of and putting a line through the ones that you're not, go ahead and write down some notes for yourself so that you can continue this exercise later. We're going to put up a poll so that we can ask you how you felt about this. So again, finish that up, and then we will get started with our actual exercises. I love the feedback in the chat. Wow, this is difficult. I think we figured that out there. And Crystal, don't hate it is one of my favorite phrases. Not the worst thing that's happened, but probably not my favorite. But if you haven't had a chance, go ahead and finish up that poll, and then we're going to get started. All right, so about 56% of you said not my favorite thing. I'm really happy to see that about 44% of you said it's the easiest thing ever. The reason I do this exercise is because for women especially, it's very difficult for us to acknowledge the things that we're good at, to speak about them confidently, and to really pick apart what it is that makes us so good at that thing. So we'll use this time to build on this exercise, keep it with you in front. We're gonna add to it as we go. So the first thing that we want to cover is the importance of language. And it seems simple. It seems like something that we kind of know inherently, but there are pieces of communication that we really need to think about when we are trying to communicate to our peers, our friends, our family, and even to ourselves. All communication is not equal. So in order to communicate effectively, we have to navigate so many social signals, and we have to put them through our own personal lenses. This is further compounded by the mediums that we use daily. If you think about how our year has changed, 2020 has definitely thrown us all for a loop, and we've learned to use new tools to do our jobs, communicate with our families, and handle household tasks like getting our kids to school. So I want you to think about the changes that have happened over the last few months in regard to the way that you communicate and the way that people communicate with you. Take that into account with our social media, text messaging, face-to-face, all the new ways, and maybe the ways that you've had to dig into that you're not used to using. We're gonna do another exercise to build onto that. And you are just gonna take about 30 seconds to jot down the ways that you prefer to communicate. That could be the methods. That could be the way that people talk to you. So I prefer text message, or you prefer Zoom, or whatever that is. And just go ahead and write that down. You can keep writing this down as we go. But I want you to think really critically about how you like to communicate and how you like people communicating back to you. For example, I'm a very straightforward communicator. Short and sweet, like tell me what you need and I will go and find out for you. I don't necessarily want to hear the whole backstory. I don't want to know what you did 3 weeks ago that got you here. Just tell me what you need and I will help you. I'm also someone who likes to speak face-to-face. When I say face-to-face, I definitely mean Zoom, but not a text messenger all the time, because short and sweet doesn't always work in text messaging. So think about those things as we continue through this presentation. So communication styles and methods are important because they allow us to communicate and articulate our preferred communication styles to other folks. And it can be an extremely liberating and powerful experience. As I mentioned, women often have trouble communicating their needs to other folks, communicating their accomplishments to other folks. And that can reflect in the way that you ask for things, the way that you get ahead in the workplace, the way that you build relationships. I have about 3 levels of communication I have with folks, and for people who I truly believe are working towards the same goal. So we're just clearly not on the same page, and it's through no fault of anyone's. I ask that, how can we get on the same page? I leave it as an open-ended question. How can I help you? How can you help me? These are those kinds of things you want to think about. Where are they coming from? What did they, like, how did you get here? And what can you do differently to make sure that you're understanding each other? Then there's the world in which people are being evasive or obtuse, and asking them, I like to call it feigning ignorance, asking them, can you help me understand which part of this is unclear? Can you help me understand your thought process? I'm a little bit confused about XYZ. Doesn't necessarily mean you are confused about XYZ, but it does leave space for them to think through what they've said and write it and refer it in a way that you can understand, and for you to be able to dig in and figure out which parts you're getting stuck on. And then there's folks where they're clearly not interested in communicating with you. They're clearly not interested in having conversation with you. And this whole process allows you to create a world in which you can say something to the effect of, did I stutter? And I say that for people who've used up all my goodwill. This is what it is. I have said what I need to say. If you have any concerns, let me know in some other way, but this is not open for interpretation. And you want to be able to go through each one of these levels when necessary and feel comfortable and confident in doing so. So as I mentioned before, intentional language is extremely important in what we do every single day. So it's important because language is nuanced. We have personal and cultural significance that are attached to words and the way that we say them, and that can greatly influence the way that your message is received. I want you to think very carefully about words that you're using and making sure that they are the words that you mean to use. They're the things that you want to see and hear and you want to put forward to folks. This is an example I like to use, and you can just think this through. When you are presented in a workplace and you get an example of someone who asks you what your choice is, you're being asked because generally you are an expert. You have some experience in what you're doing. A lot of the times we default to language like, I think we should go with option A. What you probably mean is, based on my experience, I recommend option A. The difference between these two sentences are one seems unsure. I think means that you're not sure of that recommendation. You're not sure that this is something that you want to put forward. Whereas based on my experience, I recommend option A. You have given the reason for the recommendation, and you have used the word recommend to say, this is a path that I would take. And it seems really small, but using this intentional language allows you to own the things that you're saying, own the experiences that you have, and own the decisions that are being made. The same can be demonstrated in personal relationships as well. In the second setting, a friend might have hurt your feelings and you want to be able to talk to them about it. Again, sometimes we default to less intentional language, and I feel like we should talk about what just happened. That is open to interpretation. It's your feeling that it should be spoken about, but if they feel like it should not be spoken about, then you set the tone for both of your feelings being equal and them being able to opt out of that conversation, even if it needs to happen. And so you want to say what you actually mean. We should talk about what just happened. I would like to talk about what just happened. Hey, let's take a moment. We need to kind of dig into this. But be intentional. Make sure that you are asking people for what you actually need and want, and leaving less interpretation in your words. So the next part of this is about inclusive language. So we are being more intentional in what we do and say. The other part is being more inclusive. Despite your best intention, you can end up offending or excluding your audience, your friends, your peers. So not only is it important to know what you mean to say, you need to know how to say it. These are some common issues we run into with using inclusive language. I've put some examples. You may want to screenshot this just to give us give you something to refer back to. But I want to dig into this one for sure as we think about appropriative language, exclusive language, ableist language. Appropriative language we hear often, and it's something like terms like spirit animal are commonly used on social media and in startup environments. And this use of the term is appropriative of indigenous cultures, and it does not belong to most of us. And you can replace it if you're a Harry Potter fan with Patronus or something else. But I want you to think about specifically what language you're using that belongs to you and what language might belong to someone else. And you may not have broached the subject of language and ownership at any point in your life, and this is a good time to check it out. Why is it offensive to use terms like this? Or why is it appropriative to use terms like this? And can you replace it with something else? If someone tells you that a word is appropriative or exclusive or ableist, you need to research. You need to, first of all, apologize in that situation and find something else to say. And then you need to dig into where you learned it. How did you learn it? What's the context behind it? The next one is exclusive language. Greeting groups by gender, like saying, hey guys, to a gender diverse group of people can exclude women, gender fluid, and non-binary peers. I usually replace it with something like, hey folks, friends, fellow humans, depending on what type of human you are. But this is so important, especially in male-dominated spaces. We might not think anything of it. In fact, we've probably assimilated and said, sure, I don't mind being one of the guys. But that's not the problem. The problem is that the language is not inclusive and it makes assumptions about a lot of things. And there's no reason to greet folks like that. It's not about the formality so much as it is about what comes with the term, hey guys. It is used so prominently because it is usually used to speak to groups of men. And so as we break into new spaces, as we explore and learn more about gender, there's a reason for us to shift away from this. And it's important that as you hear it in yourself and for other people, that you are also correcting that. So again, hey guys, Gals and girls. Sometimes people say ladies. I actually despise the guys and girls because guys is a mature version, girls is a little version, but that's neither here nor there. Whole lot to dig into, but just keeping in mind how you greet groups, how you speak about people using the pronoun they as a singular term is fine if you're not sure of the group you're addressing and things like that. And then finally, ableist language. This is something I talk about a lot in my other workshops, but using terms like crazy or lame, among other phrases, are offensive to communities where these terms have been used to unfairly identify and define people and can be damaging to those managing their mental health. And this is one of those things where intentional language and inclusive language intersect. Oftentimes when we say something is crazy, we don't actually mean crazy. Crazy is a catch-all term that we use to explain a situation for which we can't quite process. It's important and critical, so critical for you to realize that you are replacing an intentional word. So wild is one of the things I use when I need something off the cuff. Ridiculous, banana cakes, if you're prone to just saying crazy and you just can't get something else in there, I put another silly word, fakasha, whatever, to replace it. But want you to go deeper with this. Think about, why are you using those terms? Was something crazy or was it unreasonable? Was it rude? Was it horrible? Was it terrible? What is it that you want to say? You want to be intentional in what you're saying. You don't want to let people off the hook by saying, oh, they're just being crazy, when really you mean they're being a jerk, or they're being unreasonable, or hey, they're being really aggressive, right? Start to say what you mean, and make sure that when you're saying those things, you're removing any of the ableist language that we generally use to cover those topics. The next thing we're gonna go over, and this is one of my favorite parts, and we are going to do an exercise, is giving and receiving feedback. Feedback is critical. We need it for self-reflection. We need it for strengthening relationships, and it helps us form and understand outside perspectives. It took me a very long time to understand feedback, to be able to take it in and not immediately think I hate it. So keeping in mind that we need it for self-reflection. Some of the feedback that I've received has been around kind of grabbing the bull by the horns and moving forward and not necessarily explaining that to people. So they felt lost. They felt that I was kind of micromanaging. And so to be able to look at that and say that was absolutely not my intention. How do I be a better manager? How can I make sure my team knows what they need? How can I make sure that my partner knows what I need? And instead of me just going, I'll do it, no, don't worry about it. In terms of strengthening relationships, especially in the workplace, the ability to give feedback allows you to bring your authentic self to work. You can say, hey, I'm having a challenge working through this with you. Can we chat? Can we put the work to the side for a moment and just understand each other as human beings? It also means that someone can come to you and say the same thing. Hey, Sam, I'm really struggling with this conversation, and can we talk about it? Can we work through this? And then again, forming and understanding outside perspectives. Obviously, everyone needs to do that. I feel like it's a self-explanatory, but just because you are a specific group, whether it's gender, sexuality, race, there's always another perspective. That's not to say that other's perspective is correct, and we'll get to that in a moment, but understanding that there are other views and people look at things different ways, and there might be some learnings for you, either in how to address those situations or in how you carry yourself or address them internally. With all that said, not all feedback is good feedback. The first question you want to ask is it objective? That can be a bit troublesome for women, and especially women of color, when you are not sure if the feedback is is objective, or if it's a microaggression of some kind. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But the first question you ask is it objective? Would this feedback be given to someone else? The next one is, have you been given this feedback before? If I've been given feedback once, I'm like, all right, Cool, let me think about that. If I've been given feedback about the same thing like 3 times, I'm like, all right, there's something here. I need to change my approach. I need to think about this more critically, something, but it is worth speaking about if you have multiple people giving you the same type of feedback. The other one is it based on stereotypes? One of my favorite is Sam is very aggressive. You can see from this sweet face that that's not true, but aggression is also often conflated with being straightforward, being unwilling to bend to other people's feelings. The minute a woman says no, she's difficult. And so is it based on stereotypes? Is it actually what is happening? Or does someone need to take a step back and look at that? Is it a microaggression that goes into stereotypes as well? Like sometimes you get feedback and people can't quite tell you what the problem is. You might get that you need to smile more. And my first question is why, right? Does the smiling make my job better? No. Do people hate me? No. Cool. Then why are you giving me that feedback? But that is a piece of feedback that generally shows up in a performance evaluation for a woman and not for a man. And that leads into, would the same or similar feedback be provided to your peers? It took me a very long time to realize that what folks were categorizing in me as being aggressive was actually me just being ambitious, me being good at what I do. And so I wonder, and I always ask, okay, is this feedback something that my peers would get, whether it's the males in my group, whether it's the white people in my group, would they get that same feedback? And if the answer is yes, it's worth investigating. Whether or not you like it is another thing, but definitely worth talking about. And if it is not, then worth providing feedback to the person who gave it to you and asking for a little bit more info. Finding common feedback that we usually get as women is being moody, emotional, hysterical, bitchy, unfriendly. And I just want you to take a moment to think about some synonyms for these words. So emotional to me is passionate and committed. I get emotional when there's something that I really care about that's not going the way I think it should, or is, you know, being handled in a way that I can't figure out. I can also be emotional in the sense that I'm just super excited. I'm absolutely stoked, and like, I don't get in trouble for that. But if I get angry, that's a problem. Being hysterical, if something affects you, if something offends you, I expect there to be a reaction. And I do think that that's fair to say, hey, I'm upset or I'm crying because you have said or done this thing and it really, really bothers me. Hysterical is rarely what is actually happening. Anytime there's a flare of emotion, folks often freak out. They're like, I don't know what to do. She's got feelings and I don't want it. On the other side of that, being unfriendly or cold to me is professional. I come to work. I respect the work that you do. My first instinct is not to be best friends. And for some people, that's how they socialized. And so I make sure to talk to folks when I meet them and give them that example and say, hey, look, this is me. I've got a dark sense of humor. I generally I'll say thanks, I hate it 200 times. It has nothing to do with you. It's absolutely me. But I want you to take a moment to think about some feedback that you've received and put it into a couple of categories. Is it feedback that is valid? So have you gotten it more than once? Is it feedback that your peers would receive? And if you work in an all-women company, for example, that's not to say that the feedback is valid if it is based in a microaggression or a stereotype. So even if your entire team is all women and someone tells you you need to smile more, unless that is an actual competency of your job, it doesn't belong there. So I'm going to give you about 30-ish seconds to work through and think about some of the feedback that you've gotten. And I'm going to ask you to put in the chat some of the things that you have heard and the positive version of what that could be. I see some really great examples coming in the chat. Too emotional, passionate about your work. Sassy, the positive version could be bold or lively. Too aggressive, driven. Too intense, definitely heard before. And I love the alternative of focused. Not approachable. That is a really good one. This is also a really good one in startup spaces where it is something that people just walk up to your desk and I don't know, I'm working, but not being able to answer someone in a moment or take that time to do something, what that could feel like to them or how they've categorized it as unapproachable versus busy. And then talkative, love that one as well. I love networking champ, love that so much. And then the last one here is intimidating, competent. I think that's a great call out, Gretchen, absolutely. Intimidating because why, right? Like ask the questions, what here makes me intimidating? And this goes back to, again, intentional conversations. What does that concept mean to you? Do I scare you? Do I make you feel uncomfortable? Do I make you feel unheard, right? There are levels to this, and maybe that's actually what they mean when they say intimidating. But definitely ask people when you're providing feedback and giving feedback how you are affecting them and how you're interacting. Okay, and so we're going to do a prompt right now. This is a setting expectations prompt. If you've ever joined any of my other workshops, we've done this, and I want you to do a different version of this. But we are going to do intros, and you're going to start with, hi, I'm, whatever your preferred name is. My communication style is. So we thought about what our communication style and methods were earlier in this session. So what is the style that you prefer to communicate to people with? How do you best receive feedback? That's something you really need to think about. I like, my face doesn't hide anything, so I hate getting feedback in the moment because my immediate reaction is like, thanks, I hate it. And it's not because I'm not going to do anything with it later. I just don't know what to do with it right now. So I prefer folks to maybe slack me on the side or pull me aside later, but that's just me. So I best receive feedback by what's the process and what's the modality. So reading, writing, text message, what is it? And then if you end up out of alignment, if we cannot get on the same page, if we feel like we're angry texting each other, what is the way for someone to get to you, to talk to you, to make sure that you have, or they have what they need to go into a conversation with you? You're gonna take, I'd say, a minute and a half to fill in the blanks. You might wanna screenshot this. And then we're gonna put some of the pieces in the chat as an intro to the folks that you're in here with today. All right, we've got an example. Lorelei, lovely human being, has shared hers with us. Anybody else who is done or wants to share a part of it, feel free to continue. If you have any questions about how do you identify your communication style or how you receive feedback, feel free to drop it in the chat. I find it very interesting that Lorelei has put to ensure we're on the same page, call me. I have been on the fence about this one since we've all started quarantining. People call you a lot. people always want to talk on the phone. So I've been rethinking the way that I have people communicate, and also how I set my tone coming into a conversation. But very interesting that call me is the preferred one there. All right, give you another about 30 seconds. And again, if you want to screenshot this, if you don't get a chance to finish it, or you need to think about it a little more, no problem. Go ahead and do that, and do it, over the weekend as part of your homework for this. Hi, Giovanna. Alrighty. I'm going to move to the next slide so that you can see my example. Hi, I'm Sam. My communication style is straightforward and direct. I best receive feedback one-to-one when I have time to process. And to ensure we are speaking the same language or we're on the same page, feel free to jump on a call or set up in-person time for us to chat. One of the things I want you to take away from this session is this prompt as the way that you intro yourself to new people. I do this for every new one-on-one I have at any new company and for any new people that I meet. And it has saved my life. I have a lot less misunderstandings when I'm short and slack. I'm just trying to get things through. This is something that I recommend every one-on-one, even if you know people, like, hey, I just want to try this out because I think we work well together, but I just want to make sure that I'm giving you what you need in order for you to be successful. I do this with my friends as well, and my sisters. One of my sisters is like, you like solving problems too much in the moment, and I don't want that. So so I ask her, am I problem solving too much right now? What do you need from me? But we have that open communication now because I know that that's not how she prefers to receive feedback. So this is something that you can implement in multiple parts of your life. Hi, Daisy. Awesome. And then feedback best practices. I like to ask probing questions. When people give you feedback, ask more. Okay, interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And do you have any examples? It's okay if you don't, but do you have any examples of when this has happened? And is there any way for me to see it in the moment? Things like that. Ask probing questions to get to the bottom of that feedback, because just like you, they might have trouble being intentional in their language, and to be able to say, hi, I need this from you, or you're very mean to me, or I feel like you're very short with me. And I'm not sure if that's your communication style or if there's something that you and I need to work with. Have you ever had those feedback probing questions be perceived as defensive? Yes. So again, see this beautiful smile? This is how I get people. But yes, that is a possibility. And that's why I say start with that prompt when you meet new people, when you're going into a conversation. Even if it's the first time and you have to have a difficult conversation off the bat, I like to take ownership for what I'm feeling and how I react to things to put them at ease. So, hey, I'm totally sure you didn't mean to do this, but when you said this thing, when you said that, I run too fast for projects, it made me really question whether or not we're working well together. Is there, can you give me an example? How might I change that? How might I work through that? And when you center it on yourself, you give them the opportunity to provide you that open and honest feedback, but you also have an opportunity to dig more into it and decide if it's feedback that you want to take. Maybe I should be running fast with projects because our job is to make sure things get stood up. But just softening those questions, I need help understanding. I want to know more about this. I want to make this better. How can I do that? With that caveat is obviously don't change who you are as a human being if there's nothing to change. I'm not going to be much more bubbly than this. It's just not going to happen. I've been this way since I was born. Believe it or not, I was a hostess at Applebee's for 2 years and people love me. And I've never had to be anything but myself. So if that feedback is in direct contradiction to who you are or what you feel comfortable doing, definitely evaluate it. And if it doesn't feel right and authentic, don't incorporate it. Thank the person for sincere feedback. It takes a lot to come to someone's face and say, hey, I want to tell you something. Even like sometimes it's good feedback. Like, Sam, I love this meeting that you ran. Thank you. I'm always looking for ways to improve. Feel free to continue to provide that feedback. If someone gives you critical feedback, thank you. I know it can be difficult to approach these topics, and I want to do better, so I appreciate you taking this time. That thank you sets the tone for the next interaction that you have. It means that they will feel comfortable. They're going to walk away feeling good about having had an honest conversation with you, and you continue to build those honest relationships. You definitely want to reflect on the feedback, who delivered it, and how it relates to you as a person. And I mentioned that that's the same thing, right? If it doesn't feel authentic, doesn't feel true, throw it out. And then respond in a reasonable amount of time, even if it's to say, can we discuss this more? I've had times where I've said something on a call that bothered me, and I felt that I offended someone else. And I'm just like, hey, can I chat with you for a minute? I said something I didn't mean to say that, I'm sorry. But definitely don't wait 7 days to respond to feedback. Even if it's to say, can we discuss this more? Or I've been thinking about this and I need to dig into it a little bit more, but thank you so much. Can we do a debrief, or can we chat in a couple of days when I've had time to process? It's okay to say, I don't know what to do with this feedback right now, but I'm working on it. Awesome. We are just about at the end of our session. We've had a couple of activities that we've done so far. So your power statement, right? What superpower you have, what you're good at. You want to be able to confidently articulate those things to folks. For your prompt, you want to be able to tell people what your communication style is and how they can communicate with you. And then I want you to think about some of the language that you use, whether it is ableist language, exclusive language, appropriative language. What are some things that you can switch out, some things that you can start to eliminate, and some things that you can start to call out your friends on? One of those things for me is crazy. When I hear my friends and peers say that, I'm like, hey, do you mean some other word? Okay, cool. And it helps to have that accountability. It helps to tell people I'm trying to do better, and here's how I'm doing that. Please help me. If you hear me say something I shouldn't say, like, call me out on it, Slack me, text me, whatever it is. But making sure that you are committing to being more intentional and inclusive in your conversations, building authentic relationships, and be able to give and receive feedback to help grow those around you and yourself. Awesome. So we have a little bit of time left for Q&A. I will open that up for everyone to chat.
Thank you, Sam. That was excellent. So as Sam said, we're going to transition into Q&A now. At the bottom of your screen or wherever your Zoom toolbar is, please find the chat feature or the Q&A feature and send your questions over for Sam so that we can continue this conversation. So Sam, I want to take it back to the very beginning of your educational talk where you're talking about intentional language. Today, like these days, we are in such a rapid fire environment. So many of us communicate very quickly, very rapidly, very emotionally, and sometimes it can be flippant, right? Sometimes it's not exactly what we mean to say, but it's how we feel in the moment. How can we pull ourselves back and be more intentional about our language when so many of us around, so many people around us are not responding in the same way?
That's a fantastic question, Lorelei, and something that I still struggle with, something that I see on a daily basis. I am an emotional person by nature. My immediate reaction, as I said, is I hate it. And that is like my go-to for everything. I recognize that without context, however, someone's going to hear that and think, okay, well, should I have told her, or does she care? And so I try to preface it by saying, this is a hard topic for me, or, I'm not feeling great in this moment. I'm really tired. I'm hungry, whatever it is. Don't be afraid to be that vulnerable. Give people that kind of peek into your life, because you are a human being. And today is not a good day to debate racial topics with me, right? Like, I'll talk to you about anything else, but just not today. But making sure that you provide people the context for which you're coming from is really important.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I'll go ahead and ask you another question. When we catch people using offensive language, and one of the best examples, you had some really common examples like the crazy, lame, spirit animal, those sorts of things. The most vulgar one that I can think of in this moment is rape, when people misuse the word rape. And it's so shocking to me how casually it occurs. How do we respond to that in a way that is, appropriate, but keeps our reaction, keeps us from overreacting to having such a strong word used so inappropriately?
Yeah, I actually had an email come in from a marketing campaign that used that word. And it was like, this person's telling the story of blah, blah, blah. And I was like, first, there are things called trigger warnings, and those exist because it's a rough word, and it comes with a lot of connotations. It comes with a lot of experiences for people. There's a couple of steps I would take, and it really depends on who you're working with. But generally, I try to tell them in private. So right in the moment that it happens, Slack them, text them like, hey, I don't know if you realize this, but I don't think that's the appropriate word for this. I think what you meant is, and be helpful, give them something else. I think what you meant is destroyed, or, something like that. And ask them, do you want to talk more about why this isn't appropriate? Or my favorite, send them resources. Here's a link. Please read this. I don't want to talk to you about why you shouldn't be using that in this environment. But definitely call them out in the moment for things like that. Try to do it privately if you can. If this is a person who does this often, I'm okay with calling them out publicly, especially if you've asked before, and giving them a resource if you can.
Got it. Thank you for that. Okay, so we have a question saying where this person is having a really hard time with responding in a, quote, reasonable amount of time. This person is sometimes emotional, and when information gets to them, it can fester for a while. And this person requires a cooling off period that can seem long to other people. Do you have any sort of strategy for dealing with other people's expectations of responding in a reasonable amount of time, which seems so relative?
It is extremely relative, and what is reasonable for one person is not reasonable for another. And you definitely want to have time to process your emotions. I'm going to go back to just telling them, thank you for that feedback. I'm like, I need time to process this. Can I check in with you in a couple of days? Mm-hmm. And that check-in can be, hey, I still don't understand it. Like, I had a really visceral reaction to this and I'm trying to process it. On your side, the first things you should do is say, why did I have such a strong reaction to it? What is it, the person? Was it the thing that was said? Is it the topic? Is it that, again, I'm hungry, that I'm sleepy, that I'm just stressed out? Why did you have that reaction? You can start to then determine what your response can be. Like, hey, I actually don't know why I responded that way. And I'm sorry that, it might have made things uncomfortable. And I'm definitely going to acknowledge that. Or, hey, you said something that really offended me and it's because of this thing. Can we talk? But on your side, digging into it, and on their side, just telling you, thank you. Let me get back to you in a couple of days.
Got it. Let's talk more about these probing questions that you mentioned. For a lot of us, I feel like open-ended questions are a reframe from how we're used to asking questions. How can we practice creating open-ended questions to allow people the space to respond in the way that we want to gather more information from them?
Yep. This takes a lot of thought and intentionality. So it's not going to be something that tomorrow you're like, oh, I've figured this out. It is something that you also want to think about authentically, because some folks read into things, and because of the way they've been spoken to in the past might find them condescending, or, as someone mentioned, like something that they want to become defensive about. And so when you ask these questions, again, frame it from your side. Hey, sorry, I think I'm misunderstanding what is going on here. Can you walk me through this? Can you tell me kind of what your viewpoint is? You can even start by saying, the way I'm looking at it is X, Y, Z. Is that how you see it too? And they say no. All right, tell me more. All right. So being able to reframe that, being able to acknowledge that maybe you don't get it. Maybe it's actually not them and it's you, and you just need to figure this crap out. Or clearly you're on two different pages.
Got it. Okay. And could you briefly, very briefly, speak to us about intentional responses in regard to microaggression?
Oh, that's a good question.
HERdacity is a nonprofit dedicated to women's career empowerment, right? And we have all types of women from all walks of life who check us out for resources. And I know that there's probably very few women in this audience who have not had to deal with a microaggression at some point. And, you know, they add up, and they add up emotionally, they add up just in general for your life, very much a burden for many of us. So how can we intentionally respond so we don't get those ugly labels and we don't act unprofessionally? Because so many of us can feel like we carry the mantle of womanhood around with us, like we are representative of our gender when we are often in, we're the minority in certain spaces. So how can we respond to some of these microaggressions that many of us might receive that keeps us on a higher plane?
Yep. So I used an example earlier of, did I stutter? Mm-hmm. There's a certain level of acknowledgement that you are running into a microaggression. I've had people tell me, like, I thought that, you know, it was just me. I thought that I was just mean or unfriendly. And I'm like, no, someone's doing something to your brain, right? And it's called gaslighting. And that is important for you to understand, that microaggressions exist, that someone might say something to you that seems innocuous, and it is actually really offensive, and it's not the first time they've said it or done it. I usually start small. If it is a person problem, I address it directly with the person. I'm sure this wasn't your intent, but this is actually an issue that women face in the workplace. Let's dig into why you think that I'm unfriendly. Have I done something that made you feel unwelcome? If the answer is no, you need to reevaluate the way you're viewing the world, right? That is a you problem. Here's a resource. If it is something that is happening across a company, I usually go to an HR person. I will usually go to my manager. I will usually go to someone and say, do we recognize that this is our culture? Have you heard this before? Has this feedback come up? One example I'm going to use is that at one of my companies, someone was pinging folks and asking them about race and how they feel about it and do they think racism exists. And in their frame, it was a learning experience. They wanted to know more about racism in America and thought, let's find the brown folks and they'll be able to tell us. That's a culture issue. It's a huge culture issue, and it is not something that I can solve on my own. It's not something that I should have to solve on my own, and something I would bring to someone who has ability in that space. If it's a friend group, maybe something that you'll have to take on, or I'm a strong believer of befriending people if it's not a healthy relationship.
Got it. Thank you. Well, Sam, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so very much for your time, your expertise, and your passion on this topic. I hope that a lot of us were able to take so many tools away from this in practical application for our professional communication styles. Now, I encourage all of you watching to connect with Sam. She's going to throw her information up on the screen here. Y'all follow her on LinkedIn, check out our website. Great resource. Sam, thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us today. And to all of you who joined, check us out. Check out our website, HERdacity.org. We have a lot more programming for you.